So even though this is not a scientific test at all, I think that it kind of illustrates the point that having a monitor is going to help a lot when it comes down to exposing properly, especially outside. I think one of the things that people overlook is the ability to actually see the shot before you do what you have to do, and then also use all these other tools that you have to use in order to make it happen. So it doesn't have to be a super expensive monitor. These are under $300, and they kind of do the job, and they do the job well for what they do. It's definitely bright, so it stands up to its name. But so I would definitely recommend it. And I think the light is great, even though the sound is shit, and we're probably not gonna use this at all. So you want good composition, focus pulling, and great exposure tools while shooting outside. Hello, I am Andre Correa, and this is Andre Correa Now, a show about the art of filmmaking, the craft behind it, and the technologies that make it all possible. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the FeelWorld FW279, an ultra-bright external viewable monitor. The box displays FW279S, even though in reality, this is a 279. I guess they use the same box for both devices. You get an instruction manual, package list card, a ball mount cold shoe adapter, an Allen wrench with kind of like a screw. You get a mini HDMI cable, and of course the monitor. You know, it's nice when you set up a shot and then you forget to turn the lights on. Well, just for that, would you, because, obviously I need some help here. Taking a look at the monitor, we have two function buttons up here, two directional buttons to the left and to the right, a menu button, and two up and down directional buttons. Have a power button right there. So on the side, we have our HDMI ports, and this is great because you can send the images wirelessly, if you have a wireless system, directly to a client's monitor or perhaps a director's monitor. The only difference between this and the S version, so this is the 279, the 279S has two SDI ports right here. And these are useful if your camera has SDI output. One of the things to be aware is that HDMI is generally slower than SDI. So there is going to be a slight delay, and that has nothing to do with the monitor, that only has to do with the limitations of this media, okay? These guys up here, however, in addition to being faster, I think they output some other features to, coming from the camera. So if your camera has SDI, it might be useful. We unfortunately only have one port in the bottom. If you buy a cage for this monitor, you are going to be able to add a bunch of other functionalities and points of attachment. I haven't tested this yet, but I've seen people who were able to connect the SmallRig cage to this, even though the SmallRig cage was not officially designed for this. Because of the form factor, this has the same form factor as some of the other FeelWorld monitors that are compatible with the cage. On this side, we have the DC 12 volt input, so you can power this without the battery. You have your head jack port, so you can monitor your audio, and you have a USB upgrade port here, which is, looks like it's just a small or mini USB. I wouldn't hold my breath in this because I have never seen FeelWorld put up any updates. If you guys seen them, please let me know. I never saw any. Anyway, so powering this guy, I use these batteries. These are the DSTE Sony NPF third parties, and they work pretty well. I guess you can get different ports for this, but I would not, I like the NPF, so. They work well with some of the other things I have, but your mileage may vary if you have some other batteries from other manufacturers laying around. So once you plug in your HDMI, Takes a few seconds and there we go. We got it. And for whatever reason it's upside down. So this is really good because you can just go like that and fix it. That brings a good point. This monitor has two function buttons up here, and what I do is I map the first one to false color and the second one to flipping the image. Like that. And the reason why I do that is because this does not have a gyroscope. So if you want to, for example, mount it upside down or whatever, you have to, the monitor itself doesn't know that it's upside down or to the side or whatever. It's not aware of its orientation, so you have to kind of do that. And because the menu system can be a bit complicated, I find that these are the two functions that I go to all the time. I also always leave histogram on, both in the camera and on the monitor, so I can have a quick look of what's going on here. And if you can see my hair, that's where focus peaking is. When you have autofocus turned on your Sony camera, focus peaking is not going to show. Focus peaking only shows when autofocus is turned off. But if your monitor has focus peaking, that means that you can always see where the autofocus is landing and if it's where you want it to be. Taking a look at the brightness of the monitor right now, if you go to the menu a little bit, and right there, we can see that this is at about 6%. And to give a reference of how bright you can go, let's bring it to 100%. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. So this is the monitor at 100%. You'll certainly go through the battery really fast, but you can see how it's kind of like completely blowing out the image at this point. How this would make very easy to see outside, so you're not gonna have any problems at all seeing outside, even at the brightest time of the day, at the during the brightest day. When I'm shooting indoors, I bring it down to about 6%. And I feel that works well and then doesn't kill the battery as fast. For me, this is a B+. I think the build quality is good. I like how hefty it is. It's kind of like easy to handle this way. It seems by looking at it here that there's a lot of reflection, but in reality, the reflection is barely noticeable, especially when I increase the output brightness of the screen. So here's a few things to consider that I find they are lacking in this monitor. Like I said before, it doesn't have the vector scope, so that doesn't bother me very much. But what does bother me is the fact that it doesn't have a way for you to load your lookup tables, your LUTs, into the monitor itself. This isn't a big deal if you're shooting it with the Pocket 6K or the Pocket 4K, because you can load the LUTs into those cameras and then push to the monitor, and that's okay. But for us shooting with the Sony system, that becomes a bit problematic. And it becomes kind of like an issue, because what happens is oftentimes you look at the image on the monitor and be perfectly exposed, but then you go and you apply the LUTs that you want and the exposure isn't quite right. I use the limbing LUTs, and with the limbing LUTs you have to expose to the right, so it means that you have to protect your highlights, and sometimes it would be really helpful to be able to load the LUTs into the monitor to see what the final output's gonna be like, or close to what the final output's gonna be like. The other thing too is that it would be really helpful for clients to see something that resembles the actual output color versus having them, you have to have the conversation like, hey, this is really not what the thing is gonna look like. Especially if you're shooting like an S-Log3, like those colors look bad on the monitor, and clients don't know what LUTs are most of the time. So this monitor does not have a touch screen, and I don't know if that's a pro or a con, really. It would be nice to be able to navigate through the menu faster. just by touching it. However, it's also nice not to have smudges on the monitor, which would unavoidably happen if we had a touchscreen system. I think the biggest con is that the menu is a bit cumbersome, not unlike the Sony menu system. So if you're already used to that, you're probably going to be okay using the FeelWorld 279. When you're shooting in the Sony system, and this is not true for the new cameras like the a6600 and the a7R Mark IV, you're going to lose face tracking and the screen is going to go black. Like your Sony screen is going to go black. Losing face tracking, is it a big deal? It kind of is, because even though the autofocus is really good in the Sony system, not having face tracking kind of bothers me. Especially in situations where you're in a shoulder rig and maybe you are filming an action scene where you should be focused on somebody's eye and you're using autofocus. It would be nice to have face tracking stay on. In fact, I shot something like this earlier in the year where two actors are struggling and I need to keep on one actor's face because he was the main actor. And I had to turn the monitor off and just go from the viewfinder in the back of the a6400 because, you know, the lighting situation was pretty challenging in that case. You know, we kept losing the actor's face. And that wouldn't happen, and that did not happen once it turned the monitor off. So that's not a fault of the monitor, that's a fault of Sony. And again, they fixed that with the new cameras, but it's something you should be aware of. The FeelWorld 279 does not come with a gyroscope, which means you're not going to be able to flip the screen and adjust the image orientation right away. So you would have to go into the menu system and change the image orientation by clicking buttons, which is kind of cumbersome. So these are my thoughts on the FeelWorld FW279, a ultra bright gray monitor that you can work with outdoors. One of the goals that I have when it came to making this video is to show you how some of these features can help you get better images. So get out there and get better images. Until then, I am Andre Correa and this is Andre Correa Now, and I'll see you next time.